So I want you to imagine a country. Just picture a place that is basically multiplying its overall wealth by by 6 times in just a few decades.
Right, a massive economic boom.
Exactly. A place where practically every single kid goes to primary school, where almost everyone has access to broadband internet now, and where foreign money is just pouring in by the billions every single year.
Sounds like an absolute utopia on paper.
Right. I mean, you look at the skyline of the capital city, you look at the GDP figures on a spreadsheet, and you'd naturally think, wow, they've solved the economic puzzle. You'd assume the government, the social safety nets, and the legal system have all just naturally leveled up at the exact same pace.
Which is the standard assumption, yeah.
But what if I told you that in this exact same country, despite all that wealth, nearly 40% of the workforce is sitting in incredibly vulnerable, precarious jobs?
40%. That is a staggering number.
It really is. And what if I told you that the government's actual ability to function, its basic effectiveness, is, according to the hard data, stuck somewhere in the 1990s?
It shatters the illusion entirely, doesn't it? I mean, we have this very linear, comforting way of thinking about progress.
Oh, totally. Like, line goes up, everything gets better.
Exactly. We expect that when a nation crosses a certain threshold of wealth, the messy stuff, the corruption, the weak laws, the informal labor just sort of automatically resolves itself. Like, progress is supposed to rise like the tide, lifting all the boats simultaneously.
But the reality is far more complicated than that.
Vastly more complicated.
It is the ultimate imbalanced puzzle.
Hmm.
And that brings us to the core of today's deep dive. So we have been handed a custom-tailored 15-part academic data analysis of Panama's macroeconomic and social development.
And it is a fascinating set of data.
It really is. What I love about the source material you shared with me is that it is entirely data-driven. We are not looking at opinion pieces here. We are looking at hard, uncompromising metrics from the World Bank or international statistical databases.
Right. It's just the raw numbers.
Yeah. And our mission for this deep dive today is to solve this mystery. Why hasn't this rapid accumulation of wealth translated into a more effective government? And ultimately, what is the hidden human cost of the so-called Panama miracle?
Well, to understand a country like this, you can't just look at the peak of the mountain. You really have to look at the tectonic plates shifting underneath it.
I like that analogy.
Because, the Panama miracle is famous in economic circles. This is a country that has been a top-tier economic engine in Latin America for a long time. But as we unpack this data, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about how global capitalism actually functions when it hits the ground.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the sheer scale of the wealth creation first because, we have to give credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. The growth is real.
The data tracks Panama's GDP per capita, and importantly, it uses constant 2015 US dollars. So it completely strips away inflation.
Right, which is a crucial distinction.
Yeah, because we aren't just looking at money printing here or currency fluctuations. We're looking at real, tangible purchasing power. Over the last few decades, that number has climbed from around $2,500 early on to over $15,000.
That is just a masterclass in wealth creation. Moving a population from $2,500 to over $15,000 per capita.
Yeah.
That signifies a massive, undeniable elevation in the material living standards of a nation.
It's a totally different world.
It is. It means going from an economy where basic subsistence is the primary concern for the majority of people to an economy capable of consuming global goods, building modern infrastructure, and really participating in the international market. It's the kind of compounding math that completely rewrites a nation's destiny.
And the growth rate driving that is just wild. Historically, the data shows Panama has often seen 5 to 10% annual GDP growth.
Which most developed nations would kill for today.
Oh, without a doubt. But here is where the data introduces a terrifying caveat. Around the year 2020, the economic growth line doesn't just dip. It falls off an absolute cliff.
It really does.
We are talking about a contraction of negative 17.9% in a single year.
Which is, frankly, catastrophic.
Yeah.
We really need to pause and put a negative 17.9% drop into perspective here, because numbers that large start to lose their meaning,
Yeah, it just sounds like a statistic until you break it down.
Exactly. Like, think about the 2008 global financial crisis. The United States economy contracted by roughly 4%, and it felt like the sky was falling.
Right. Millions of people lost their homes, entire industries required bailouts, and the reverberations lasted for a decade.
Now imagine an economic contraction more than 4 times as severe as that. An 18% drop means the economic engine didn't just stall, it violently seized up.
Supply chains break, businesses vanish overnight.
And the flow of capital simply stops. Just a total halt.
But wait, because the whiplash here is insane. The very next year, the data shows a perfectly V-shaped bounce back. The economy shoots straight back up by over 16.4%.
And that right there is the definition of extreme economic elasticity. Panama possesses an incredible resilience, this ability to snap back to life, but it is paired with an equally extreme volatility.
I was trying to visualize this for someone living inside that economy. It's like Panama's high-performance sports car, right?
Okay, I see where you're going.
A multi-million-dollar hypercar with a massive engine, but the engineers completely forgot to install any shock absorbers.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
It goes incredibly fast, faster than almost anyone else on the road.
Yeah.
But every single pebble, every pothole, every bump in the global macroeconomic road is felt directly by the passengers right in their teeth.
And let's unpack why there are no shock absorbers. Because it's not an accident, it's actually a structural feature of their specific economic model. Well, when a country relies entirely on external forces like global trade volume passing through a canal, for instance, it abdicates control over its own stability. Extreme economic resilience combined with extreme volatility means the country is hypersensitive to the global macro environment.
So they're basically strapped to the mast of the global ship.
Exactly. When global trade is booming, the sports car is flying. But when there is a global shock, the impact is utterly unfiltered.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine your own personal income for a second. Imagine your salary drops by nearly 20% one year.
Just gone overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're scrambling, you're cutting costs, maybe you're defaulting on a mortgage or pulling your kids out of activities, and then the very next year it surges back up by 16%. How on earth do you plan for the future with that?
It's nearly impossible.
How do you save? How do you build generational security when the ground is moving that violently?
You don't, or, well, at least it becomes incredibly difficult unless you are already at the very top of the wealth distribution. And that's a vital point to make right at the start of this deep dive.
Right.
While the country as a whole has accumulated incredible wealth, measuring a nation purely by its peak GDP growth masks the terrifying reality of those deep valleys for the average citizen. High volatility breeds insecurity, even in a very wealthy system.
Which naturally brings us to the most important question.
Yeah.
Why? Why is this economy so incredibly elastic?
You have to look at what they actually do for money.
Exactly. If you want to understand why Panama is so volatile, look at their industrial structure. And the data breakdown honestly made me do a double take.
It's pretty extreme.
They don't really make anything. Over 70% of their entire economy is just services.
Specifically, the data shows the service sector fluctuating between 65 and 74% of total GDP over time.
And on the flip side, their primary sector, meaning agriculture, forestry, and fishing, has shriveled to under 3%. I think it hit lows of just 2.4% at one point.
Which is almost unheard of for a developing nation.
If you took all the money Panama makes in a year and put it in a giant pile, the amount generated by actual agriculture, farming the land, pulling fish from the sea, wouldn't even make up 3% of that pile. It is practically non-existent.
And we should talk about why that matters. Because most developing economies try to maintain some semblance of a primary sector, even as they modernize.
Because you need to eat.
Exactly. Agriculture isn't just about GDP, it's about food security, it's about rural employment, and crucially, it acts as a stabilizing force during global downturns. People still need to eat, even if global shipping stops.
So when your primary sector shrinks to 2.4%, you have essentially abandoned the traditional model of a self-sustaining nation.
You have. You've gone all in on a completely different strategy.
So what does this all mean for their day-to-day survival? The image I get is a country that has essentially paved over its farms and turned itself entirely into a global toll booth, a banker, and a logistics manager.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that's precisely what a hyper-financialized, service-driven economy looks like.
Right.
Because Panama relies so heavily on the canal, their massive global banking sector, and their logistics hubs, their economic lifeblood is entirely dictated by external supply chains.
They aren't growing the wealth from their own soil.
Exactly. They are catching it in a net as it moves between other nations.
And the data proves just how extreme that dependency really is. There is a metric here, tracking total trade, meaning imports plus exports as a percentage of GDP.
This is one of the most mind-bending stats in the whole report.
It really is. Now, for most people, if something is a percentage of a whole, it obviously shouldn't go over 100%. But Panama completely blasts past it.
Oh, yeah.
Their total trade routinely exceeds 100% of GDP. Historically, the data shows it peaking at over 150%, 165%, and even an astonishing 174%.
Which I know sounds like a math error.
It really does.
Yeah.
How is that mathematically possible?
Well, it happens because the value of the goods passing through the country stuff being imported, maybe slightly modified or repackaged in a free trade zone, and then immediately re-exported is physically larger than the entire internal domestic production of the nation itself.
Wow.
Yeah. Panama isn't just participating in the global economy, it is a physical conduit for it.
And that perfectly explains the sports car with no shock absorbers analogy. If your total trade is 174% of your GDP, you're entirely at the mercy of the outside world.
Completely exposed.
If a massive container ship gets stuck sideways in the Suez Canal halfway across the world, or a pandemic shuts down global manufacturing, or a financial crisis in Europe freezes capital markets, Panama feels it instantly.
You sacrifice self-sufficiency for absolute centrality in global capitalism. You become a vital node in the network, but you are entirely dependent on the health of that network.
It's a high-stakes game.
It really is. And the primary fuel keeping this node operational is external capital. The data shows foreign direct investment, or FDI, hovering consistently between 8 and 15% of GDP.
But wait, let me challenge that for a second. If FDI is flooding into the country at up to 15% of GDP, shouldn't that be a universally good thing?
You would certainly think so.
I mean, foreign money pouring in means more investment, more infrastructure,
Yeah.
and more jobs, right? Why wouldn't that stabilize the economy?
Well, it's the double-edged sword. We have to look at what that foreign direct investment is actually building.
Sure.
That money isn't coming in to build massive factories that employ tens of thousands of middle-class workers with steady contracts.
What is it building then?
It's coming in to build luxury, high-rise condominiums in Panama City. It's funding highly automated logistics hubs at the ports. It's establishing holding companies and international bank branches. These are highly capital-intensive projects, not labor-intensive ones.
So the wealth comes into the country, but it bypasses the working class almost entirely.
Exactly. Global investors view Panama as a safe harbor, a strategic transit point, and a financial center. But this kind of capital is incredibly flighty.
Flighty meaning it can leave just as fast as it came.
Precisely. It is highly sensitive to global interest rates and investor sentiment. If the U.S. Federal Reserve raises interest rates, or if global capital tightens, that FDI fuel line is pinched immediately. The investors just move their money to the next spreadsheet cell.
Okay, so we've established the macro stage here.
Yeah.
We are looking at a wildly wealthy, service-dominated, hyper-globalized hub fueled by foreign money that bounces up and down with the whims of global trade.
That's the landscape, yes.
Now, we need to transition from the abstract billions to the actual human beings living inside this machine. What happens to the people?
This is where the structural imbalances really begin to reveal their human cost. And the data presents us with a fascinating paradox regarding the workforce.
Well, let's look at the demographics first. The data tracks the working age population, so people aged 15 to 64. And on the surface, it's a wildly positive trend.
Very positive.
The percentage of the population in this prime working age has steadily climbed from roughly 52% to about 65%.
This is the textbook definition of a demographic dividend, or sometimes it's called a demographic window.
What does that mean exactly?
It's a golden, fleeting era in a nation's life cycle where you have the maximum possible number of productive workers relative to the number of dependents, meaning young children and the elderly.
So they have the absolute best possible age structure to generate wealth right now. They have the human fuel ready to go.
Precisely. If you are going to run a massive service economy, you need people to man the ports, staff the banks, manage the logistics, and work in the sprawling hospitality sector.
Right.
Panama has the perfect demographic profile for this exact moment in time.
And it's not just raw manpower either. It's educated manpower. The data tracks foundational human capital, specifically education.
And the numbers look great.
Primary school graduation rates are sitting between 90 and 99%. And the retention of children, making it to at least the 5th grade is over 90%.
Which proves that the state has, in fact, successfully deployed some of that massive macroeconomic wealth into building foundational human capital.
They aren't just hoarding it all.
Right. They've built the schools, they've hired the teachers, they've gotten the kids into the classrooms. The basic building blocks required for a transition toward a knowledge-based economy are firmly in place. You aren't dealing with a largely illiterate workforce here. You have an educated base.
And they are incredibly connected to the modern world, too. There's a metric here tracking digital penetration. Fixed broadband subscriptions have absolutely skyrocketed, approaching near 100 per 100 people.
Which is a non-negotiable requirement for their economic model. You literally cannot run a global financial and logistics hub without world-class digital infrastructure. The commercial environment has to be fully modernized.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So we have an educated population. They are in the prime of their working lives. They are connected to the global internet.
Everything is perfectly lined up.
Naturally, you'd assume they are reaping the rewards of this massive GDP growth and that $15,000 per capita wealth. But when we look at their actual employment contracts, the reality is incredibly grim.
This is the paradox of the hyper-financialized service model.
The data measures something called vulnerable employment. Despite all the wealth, all the education, and all the connectivity, the rate of vulnerable employment remains stubbornly high. We are talking about 30 to 40% of the workforce.
We really need to define exactly what vulnerable employment actually looks like mechanistically on the ground.
Yeah, let's break that down.
These are not people working salary jobs at international banks in the capital. These are people who are self-employed without any formal business registration, or they are unpaid family workers. They operate entirely in the informal economy.
So we're talking about street vendors, gig workers, day laborers, domestic help.
Exactly. And the defining characteristic of vulnerable employment is the total absence of a safety net.
None at all.
None. They don't have legally mandated Social Security contributions. They don't have workplace injury protections. They don't have unemployment insurance.
Wow.
So when the GDP drops 17.9%, there is no severance package. Their income simply drops to zero.
But how is it possible that a country with so much wealth, pulling in billions from the canal and global trade, has up to 40% of its prime age workforce stuck in these vulnerable, informal jobs?
It's a great question.
Like, why aren't they getting hired into the formal economy?
Because an economy that is 70% services and 2% agriculture doesn't generate the broad, stable, middle-class jobs that traditionally stabilize a developing workforce.
Right.
Think about the historical path of industrialization in other countries. When a nation builds factories and manufacturing plants, it creates millions of steady, unionized, or at least contract-based jobs. Manufacturing requires a massive middle layer of management, logistics, and skilled labor.
But Panama skipped that step. They don't really have a manufacturing base.
Precisely. So what happens mechanistically? The economy creates a very small, highly lucrative layer of jobs at the top: corporate lawyers, international bankers, specialized logistics engineers.
The penthouse jobs.
Right. And underneath that, it generates a massive volume of low-end, precarious service jobs. Housekeeping for the luxury hotels, retail workers, informal transit drivers, food delivery.
It creates an hourglass economy.
Exactly. All the wealth concentrates at the top, a huge vulnerable workforce expands at the bottom, and the middle is completely hollowed out.
And the data shows this structural flaw hits women particularly hard. There is a deep dive here into gender disparity within the labor force.
Yes, the gender data is very revealing.
Women face a significantly higher rate of part-time employment, fluctuating between 30 and 40%, compared to men who are in the 20 to 30% range.
Both are high, but the gap is clear.
Right. Both genders are highly exposed to vulnerable work, but women are bearing the absolute brunt of the part-time, precarious labor.
We have to ask how an informal service economy specifically disadvantages women, and it really comes down to the architecture of social support.
Okay.
In a formalized economy, the social safety nets that support female workforce participation, things like affordable, regulated childcare, paid maternity leave, and predictable scheduling, those are heavily tied to formal corporate jobs or state mandates applied to registered businesses.
Right, like if you work for a formal company, they have to give you maternity leave by law.
Exactly. But if you are in the informal sector, you are entirely on your own. There is no subsidized childcare for a street vendor.
So if a family needs someone to care for children or elderly relatives, that burden disproportionately falls on women.
Yes. Because they lack access to formal support systems, they are forced to seek out flexible, part-time, precarious roles just to balance basic survival and caregiving. The structure of the economy physically prevents them from formalizing their labor.
So if you are one of those workers, you're educated, you're connected to the internet, you're living in a country pulling in billions, but you are selling goods on the street or cleaning houses with no contract.
When that sports car hits a bump and the economy contracts by 18%, you are the one thrown right through the windshield.
You literally become the shock absorber for the entire economy.
You do. The foreign capital at the top can flee to other markets. The international holding companies can weather the storm. But the vulnerable worker at the bottom takes the full, unmitigated impact of the recession.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of this data analysis. If the wealth isn't trickling down into stable jobs, what is the government doing about it?
Right, where's the state in all this?
Exactly. Why hasn't the system modernized to protect its people? Has Panama's institutional construction kept pace with its wealth accumulation?
And the data gives us an incredibly sobering, definitive answer. No.
Now, I need to be very, very clear here for you listening. The metrics we are about to discuss are not political opinions.
No, not at all.
We are not taking a stance on any specific administration or political party in Panama. These are impartial, long-term data evaluations of governance provided by international bodies like the World Bank.
They are designed to measure the mathematical mechanics of how a state operates, regardless of who is in charge.
And the numbers are just bleak.
They reveal the fundamental flaw in the Panama miracle.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that they explain exactly why that 40% of the workforce is trapped.
Let's start with corruption control. The World Bank scores this on a scale from -2.5 to +2.5.
Okay.
Now, a highly developed, wealthy nation should be scoring well above a +1.0. But Panama's scores are entirely in the negative.
Entirely negative.
Over the long term, these assessment values have actually worsened. Early figures were slightly negative, around -0.1 or -0.2. But recently, they have plunged down to around -0.64.
We need to unpack what this metric actually measures, because it's not just about a local police officer taking a bribe to ignore a speeding ticket.
That's petty corruption.
Exactly. This metric heavily weighs grand corruption, the capture of the state by elite interest groups.
State capture.
Right. A score plunging to -0.64 in a country with a $15,000 per capita GDP is a glaring, deafening alarm bell.
It tells us that the massive wealth flowing through that global hub is being systematically intercepted, directed, and protected by entrenched interests before it can ever be deployed for the public good.
Yeah.
And that bleeds directly into the next metric, rule of law. Same scale, -2.5 to +2.5. And again, Panama never manages to cross the zero line into positive territory. It hovers entirely in the negative, fluctuating between 0.0 and -0.35.
Rule of law measures the confidence that economic agents have in the rules of society. It measures the quality of contract enforcement, property rights, the police, and the courts.
Let's connect this back to the informal workers we just talked about.
Perfect example.
Say you are a vulnerable worker and you've saved up a little money and you want to formalize your small business. You want to register it, get a loan, and hire an employee legally.
If the rule of law is negative, contract enforcement is weak, and commercial regulation is convoluted or corrupt, the friction to formalize is simply too high.
You just give up.
You stay in the shadows because the legal framework doesn't protect you, it only extracts from you.
And finally, we look at government effectiveness. Despite the GDP multiplying 6 times over in the last few decades, government effectiveness has completely flatlined.
She doesn't move at all.
It is stuck in a tiny, narrow band between -0.1 and +0.2.
Government effectiveness measures the quality of public services, the capacity of the civil service, and its independence from political pressures.
So if your GDP is growing by 10% a year, but your government's ability to actually administer services is completely stagnant at 0, you have a massive structural bottleneck.
It's completely disconnected.
So what does this all mean? I keep picturing this analogy. It's like Panama is building this cutting-edge billion-dollar glass and steel skyscraper.
The economy.
Yeah, that's the economy.
Incorrect.
It's beautiful. It's modern. There are foreign investors drinking champagne in the penthouses. But you go down into the basement, and the people running the building security, the maintenance, the structural integrity, they're using a corrupted, glitchy 1990s desktop computer.
And we have to ask the critical question, why don't they just upgrade the computer?
Seriously.
A country with that much money could easily afford to buy better institutions. They could hire the best consultants, digitize their civil service, and root out corruption. But the reason they don't upgrade the security software in the basement isn't because they can't afford it.
Why wouldn't they?
Because the people in the penthouse are exploiting the glitches in that old software to avoid paying their maintenance fees.
Oh, wow.
If you fix the computer, the elites lose their loopholes. This is the concept of institutional lag. Wealth can grow exponentially overnight if you open your doors to foreign capital and trade.
But building a robust civil service, establishing an independent judiciary, and dismantling entrenched corruption.
That requires the people currently benefiting from the weak system to voluntarily give up their leverage. And history shows they rarely do that willingly.
That makes total sense. When the rule of law is weak and corruption control is negative, the wealth naturally concentrates at the top. The elites thrive specifically because of the state capture.
Exactly.
And this is the exact mechanism that causes the vulnerable employment. The administrative state simply lacks the effectiveness, the funding, and the integrity to implement the massive labor reforms, the social safety nets, and the formalization programs needed to protect that 40% of the workforce.
The political will isn't there because the system is already working perfectly for those in charge.
The machinery of the state cannot handle the sheer scale of the economic engine it houses, or, more accurately, it is designed not to handle it.
Well said.
Which brings us to the big picture takeaway. The data leaves us with an incredibly clear, synthesized view of this imbalanced development model.
It really paints a complete picture.
Panama proves that if you have a unique geography like the canal and you throw your doors wide open to foreign capital, you can buy yourself extreme wealth. You can build a massive service sector, you can get everyone online, and you can get kids into primary school.
But the core challenge remains entirely unsolved.
Yeah.
The lack of institutional reform, the deeply negative corruption control, and a massive, structurally vulnerable workforce act as giant weights dragging the country down.
These are the stumbling blocks keeping Panama from truly crossing the threshold into a fully developed high-income society that actually works for everyone, not just the elites.
Economist is a specific term for this, the middle income trap.
Right.
Though Panama is arguably pushing into high-income territory by sheer GDP numbers, the structural trap is exactly the same.
Which is what, exactly?
It's the point where the strategies that got you from poor to wealthy, like being a cheap logistics hub, offering tax incentives, and relying on basic foreign investment, are no longer enough to get you from wealthy to advanced.
You hit a ceiling.
Yes. To make that final leap, you don't need more money. You need better rules. You need an independent judiciary, transparent governance, and a protected, formalized labor force.
And that is why this case study is so incredibly relevant to you listening right now. It proves that data can look absolutely amazing on the surface.
Oh, totally.
If you just quickly Googled Panama GDP growth, you would think it's an unstoppable, perfect utopia. But without looking at the structural data, the boring stuff, the institutional metrics, the labor vulnerability stats, you have absolutely no idea what the true health of that system is.
You're flying blind.
And that critical thinking applies whether you're analyzing a developing country, researching a multinational company, or even looking at a personal investment.
Surface metrics are vanity. Structural metrics are reality. You always have to look at the foundation.
And that leads us to a final, really provocative thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
For the next decade, the data makes it incredibly clear that Panama's narrative has to shift.
It really does.
It has to move from accumulating more wealth to the much harder work of rebuilding institutions.
But here's the paradox we want you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. If a system is already so incredibly wealthy because of its current imbalances, if the elites are thriving specifically because the global toll booth is open and the local regulations are weak, what incentive do those at the top really have to fix the foundation?
It's the ultimate question. Can a country ever truly buy its way into becoming a developed nation just by stacking up cash? Or is the painful, unglamorous, and deeply disruptive work of institutional reform the only real price of admission?
History strongly suggests you can't cheat the system forever. Eventually, the skyscraper needs a solid foundation, or a strong enough wind will bring the whole thing down.
And as we saw with that 17.9% drop, well, actually, when you don't have shock absorbers, the wind hits you very, very hard. So next time you see a jagged line on an economic x-ray showing record-breaking GDP, remember to look closer. The real story and the real human impact is always hiding in the muddy waters of the institutions.